dust cloud rose behind Marianne Fletcher's boots as she stormed out of the church social hall in Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory, her emerald dress swishing with every furious step, and the shocked gasps of the ladies' auxiliary echoing in her wake like the final notes of a poorly sung hymn. It was September 1876, and she had just committed what the good women of Cheyenne considered an unforgivable sin. She had spoken her mind about women's suffrage at a town meeting, and worse yet, she had done so with passion and conviction that made the men uncomfortable and the women scandalized. Marianne was 23 years old, unmarried, and the daughter of the late Samuel Fletcher, who had owned a successful mercantile before his death 2 years prior. She had inherited his business sense, but not apparently his diplomatic nature. Her father had taught her to read, write, and think for herself, gifts that had become curses in a town where women were expected to smile prettily and defer to masculine wisdom on all matters of importance. "Marianne Fletcher, you should be ashamed of yourself," Mrs. Pemberton had hissed as Marianne gathered her shawl. "No decent man will ever want a wife who argues politics like some kind of radical suffragette." Marianne had turned, her auburn hair catching the lamplight, and replied with perfect clarity, "Then I suppose I shall have to wait for an indecent man, Mrs. Pemberton, because I will not pretend to be stupid to make someone comfortable with his own ignorance." The silence that followed had been absolute and damning. Now, as she walked down Ferguson Street toward the modest house she shared with her elderly aunt, Marianne felt the familiar weight of isolation settling on her shoulders. This was not the first time her outspokenness had cost her social standing. She had been uninvited from 3 dinner parties this month alone. The other unmarried women avoided her at church. Even the shopkeepers treated her with barely concealed disdain, though they were happy enough to take her money when she needed supplies. The September evening was cooling rapidly as Wyoming evenings did, and Marianne wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She could hear the distant sound of piano music from one of the saloons on 17th Street, mixed with the occasional whoop of cowboys enjoying their Friday night freedoms. She quickened her pace, wanting to reach home before full darkness fell. "Miss Fletcher." The voice came from her left, deep and measured, and Marianne turned to see a tall figure stepping out from the shadows near the feed store. Her hand went instinctively to the small pistol she carried in her pocket, a habit her father had insisted upon. "I mean no harm," the man said quickly, raising his hand slightly. "I was at the town meeting tonight, heard what you said about women deserving the vote and property rights." Marianne's eyes adjusted to the dimness, and she could make out a cowboy in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a weathered face that spoke of long days under the Wyoming sun. He wore working clothes, dusty chaps over worn denim, and a hat that had seen better years. His eyes, however, were startlingly clear and direct. "And I suppose you followed me here to tell me I'm a disgrace to my sex?" Marianne asked, keeping her hand near her pocket. The cowboy's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "No, ma'am. I followed you to tell you that you were the only person in that room speaking sense, and it was a damn shame how those women treated you for it." Marianne blinked, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon?" "Name is Cole Bennett," he said, taking a step closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "I work at the Triple Bar Ranch about 15 miles north of here. Been working cattle since I was 14, and I have traveled from Texas to Montana Territory in my time. I have met all kinds of people, and I can tell you this. The most dangerous person is not the one who speaks their mind. It is the one who pretends to have no mind at all." There was something in his voice, a rough sincerity that made Marianne's defensive posture relax slightly. "That is very philosophical for a cowboy, Mr. Bennett." "I read books," Cole said simply. "My mother was a school teacher in San Antonio before she passed. She made sure I knew that education was not just for rich folks or city people. She also told me that a woman with intelligence was worth 10 pretty fools, and I have found that to be true in my experience." Marianne studied him more carefully now. He was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and eyes that seemed genuinely interested in her as a person, not as an object to be managed or corrected. It was so unusual that she found herself suspicious. "Why are you really here, Mr. Bennett?" Cole shifted his weight, and for the first time, he looked slightly uncomfortable. "Because I watched you walk out of that hall with your head high, and I thought to myself that here was a woman who knew her worth. And I like a woman who knows her worth. Too many people in this world will try to tell you what you are worth, usually less than what you truly are. But you did not let them do that to you." The words hit Marianne with unexpected force. She had been bracing herself for criticism for so long that genuine admiration felt almost foreign. "You do not even know me." "No, ma'am, I do not," Cole agreed. "But I would like to, if you would permit it." Marianne opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She was being courted by a cowboy who had just complimented her for the very trait that had made her a social pariah. The absurdity and the appeal of it warred in her mind. "I am not easy company, Mr. Bennett," she finally said. "I speak my mind. I have opinions on politics, on business, on literature, on everything that women are supposed to smile vacantly about. I do not simper or flatter. I argue when I think someone is wrong, regardless of their sex or station. Most men find this intolerable." "Most men are fool," Cole said bluntly. "A conversation worth having is one where both people think for themselves. Otherwise, you're just talking to an echo, and I can get that shouting into a canyon." Despite herself, Marianne smiled. "You have an answer for everything, do you not?" "No, ma'am, but I have learned to recognize quality when I see it, whether in horseflesh or people." "Did you just compare me to a horse, Mr. Bennett?" His eyes widened in horror. "No, I meant that I have an eye for value, and I did not mean to imply that you were livestock. I apologize. Sometimes I speak before I think properly, and my mother would have smacked me for that." Now Marianne laughed outright, a genuine sound that surprised her with its lightness. "You are forgiven, Mr. Bennett, though I suggest you work on your compliments before you attempt to court any other women." "I am not interested in courting other women," Cole said, his voice serious again. "Just you, if you will allow it." The directness was refreshing after years of coded language and social games. Marianne made a decision that probably was not wise, but felt right. "I will be at the Mercantile tomorrow afternoon. I help with the books on Saturdays. If you happen to be in town and wish to continue this conversation, I will not object." Cole's face broke into a genuine smile that transformed his weathered features. "I will be there, Miss Fletcher. You have my word." He tipped his hat and disappeared back into the evening shadows, leaving Marianne standing alone on the street with a strange flutter in her chest that she had not felt in a very long time, if ever. When she arrived home, her Aunt Dorothy was waiting with hot tea and knowing eyes. "I saw you speaking with a man on the street." "He followed me from the meeting," Marianne said, hanging her shawl on the hook by the door. "Should I be concerned?" Dorothy was 70 years old and sharp as a tack despite her age. "No, he was kind. He said he admired my speaking my mind." Dorothy raised her eyebrows so high they nearly disappeared into her silver hairline. "Well, that is a first. What is his name?" "Cole Bennett. He works at the Triple Bar Ranch." "I know that ranch," Dorothy said thoughtfully. "Good operation. The owner, Mr. Patterson, runs it fair and pays his men decent wages. If this Bennett works there, he must be competent and honest. Patterson does not tolerate troublemakers or drunks." Marianne sat down at the small kitchen table, accepting the teacup Dorothy offered. "I told him he could call on me tomorrow at the Mercantile." "Good," Dorothy said firmly. "You deserve someone who appreciates your fire instead of trying to smother it. Your father would have approved, I think." The next morning, Marianne woke with an unfamiliar nervousness fluttering in her stomach. She chose a practical calico dress in deep blue, not her finest, but becoming nonetheless, and pinned her hair in a simple style that kept the curls off her face. She did not want to appear as though she was trying too hard, but she also did not want to look like she had made no effort at all. The balance was delicate and irritating. The Mercantile that had been her father's pride was now managed by Mr. Hendricks, an efficient but unimaginative man who valued Marianne's bookkeeping skills while privately disapproving of her unmarried state. She had sold him the business after her father's death, retaining a small percentage and her role managing the financial records. It gave her income and purpose, two things she valued highly. She spent the morning reviewing inventory lists and updating the ledgers, her mind only occasionally wandering to whether Cole Bennett would actually appear. Men said many things in the romantic dimness of evening that they did not mean in the harsh light of day. She had learned not to invest too much hope in promises. At 2:00, she heard the door chime and looked up from her desk in the back office. Through the doorway, she could see Cole Bennett entering the store, hat in hand, looking freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. His hair was still damp at the edges. He had clearly made an effort, and something warm bloomed in Marianne's chest at the sight. Mr. Hendricks approached him with the professional smile he reserved for customers. "Can I help you find something, sir?" "I am here to see Miss Fletcher, if she is available," Cole said clearly. The warmth in Marianne's chest grew warmer. She stood and walked out to the main floor, aware of Mr. Hendricks's disapproving frown, but choosing to ignore it entirely. "Mr. Bennett," she said, keeping her voice level. "Punctual. I appreciate that in a person." "My mother taught me that showing up late was the same as saying your time mattered more than the other person's," Cole replied. "And I do not think that about you." "Would you care to walk? There is a park near the Capitol building that is pleasant this time of day." "I would like that very much." Mr. Hendricks cleared his throat meaningfully, but Marianne simply removed her work apron, retrieved her shawl, and walked out with Cole without a backward glance. She could feel the stares of other shoppers as they left together, but for once she did not care what they thought. The park was indeed pleasant, with cottonwood trees providing dappled shade and a few benches placed strategically for viewing the modest but dignified territorial Capitol building. They walked slowly, and Marianne was acutely aware of Cole's presence beside her, solid and calm. "Tell me about your ranch work," she said, genuinely curious. Cole seemed pleased by the question. "Right now, we are preparing for the winter, moving cattle to lower pastures, making sure the feed stores are adequate, repairing fences and buildings. It is hard work but honest. I like seeing the results of what I do. I like working with the animals. Cattle are not smart, but they are straightforward. A horse, though, a good horse has personality and opinion. You have to earn a horse's respect. Unlike women, who are simply expected to give respect regardless of whether it is earned," Marianne observed. "That has been my observation, yes," Cole agreed, "though I think it is a poor system. Respect should always be earned through action and character, not assumed through accident of birth or sex." They sat on a bench beneath a large cottonwood, and Marianne found herself studying his profile. "You are an unusual man, Mr. Bennett. Most cowboys I've encountered are not particularly interested in philosophy or women's rights. Most cowboys I know are good men who work hard and try to live decent lives," Cole said. "But you are right that many have not thought much beyond the way things have always been. I had the advantage of a mother who made me think. She used to say that tradition was just peer pressure from dead people, and we should examine whether traditions still made sense before following them blindly." Marianne laughed, delighted. "I would have liked your mother very much, I think." "She would have liked you too," Cole said, and there was sadness in his voice now. "She died when I was 16. Fever took her in 3 days. My father had already passed when I was 12. Ranch accident. After my mother died, I headed north, working ranches as I went. Been at the Triple Bar for 4 years now. Mr. Patterson is a fair boss, and the work is steady." "I am sorry for your losses," Marianne said softly. "I lost my mother when I was 10, and my father 2 years ago. My Aunt Dorothy is all the family I have left." "Then we are both orphans of a sort," Cole said. "Maybe that is why I recognized something in you last night. People who have lost much learn to value what remains, and they learn to stand on their own 2 feet because there is no choice in the matter." They talked for 2 hours, sitting on that bench as the afternoon light shifted and changed. Cole asked her about the mercantile, about her father, about what books she liked to read. Marianne found herself telling him things she had not shared with anyone, about how she had wanted to keep the store herself, but the bank would not loan money to an unmarried woman, about how she felt trapped in a town that saw her only as a problem to be solved through marriage to someone who would quiet her down. You should not have to quiet yourself, Cole said firmly. The world needs people who speak truth, even when it is uncomfortable, especially when it is uncomfortable. That is a lovely sentiment, Mr. Bennett, but it does not change my reality. I am running out of social capital in this town. Soon enough, I will be completely ostracized, and that will affect my ability to work, to live independently, to exist here at all. Cole was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped between his knees. What if you did not have to exist here? What if there was somewhere else you could go? Where would I go? I have no family elsewhere, no resources beyond my small income from the mercantile shares. You could go to the ranch, Cole said slowly, as though working through the idea as he spoke. Mr. Patterson's wife died last year, and he has been trying to manage the household himself while running the ranch. He mentioned just last week that he wished he could find someone educated to help with the books and correspondence. He sends cattle to markets in Denver and Omaha, ships beef to buyers in Chicago. It is a substantial operation, and he is drowning in paperwork. Marianne turned to look at him directly. Are you suggesting I move to a ranch 15 miles from town to keep books for your employer? That would be even more scandalous than speaking my mind at town meetings. An unmarried woman living at a ranch full of cowboys? Not if you were married, Cole said, and his voice was steady, but his hands had tightened on his knees. Not if you were my wife. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Marianne stared at him, searching for signs of jest or madness, but found only earnest intensity in his expression. Mr. Bennett, we have known each other for approximately 18 hours. Yes, he agreed. And in that time, I have learned that you are intelligent, brave, principled, and honest. Those are the qualities that matter. I do not need 6 months of courtship to know that I would rather spend my days with a woman who challenges me to think than one who simply agrees with everything I say. I have been alone for a long time, Miss Fletcher. I am good at being alone, but I think I might be better at being with you. Marianne's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. This is insane. Probably, Cole admitted, but is it more insane than staying here where you are miserable? Where every day you have to choose between being yourself and being accepted? I am offering you a choice. You could come to the Triple Bar as my wife. You would have work that uses your skills, a home where you can speak your mind without fear, and a husband who will value your opinions rather than resent them. In return, I would have a partner, a companion, someone to build a life with. You are proposing a marriage of convenience, Marianne said slowly. I am proposing a marriage of mutual respect and potential, Cole corrected. I will not lie and say I am in love with you after one day, but I am drawn to you in a way I have not been drawn to anyone in years. I think we could be happy together. I think we could build something real. Marianne stood up and paced a few steps away, her mind racing. It was mad, utterly mad. She barely knew this man. Yet everything he said resonated with a deep truth she felt in her bones. She was suffocating in Cheyenne. Every day was a battle to maintain her dignity while being slowly pushed to the margins of society. How much longer could she endure it? How much longer did she want to? She turned back to face Cole, who had stood as well but had not moved toward her. He was giving her space to think, to choose. That alone was remarkable. I would want certain understandings, she said carefully. Of course. Name them. I would want to continue my work with books and accounts. I would want access to newspapers and the ability to order books from Denver or Chicago. I would want my opinions heard and considered, even on matters typically reserved for men. I would want to be treated as a partner, not a subordinate. Agreed to all of it, Cole said immediately. Well, what else? Marianne felt her cheeks heat slightly. I would want time to develop the physical aspects of marriage. I will not be rushed or forced. Cole's expression turned serious. Miss Fletcher, I would never force any woman to anything. We would move at whatever pace felt right to you. If that is months or years, so be it. I want a wife, not a possession. And if I prove to be difficult and argumentative as a spouse? Then I will argue back, and we will work through it, Cole said. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership between equals, at least in my understanding. That means disagreements happen and you work them out. It does not mean one person shuts up and obeys. Marianne took a deep breath. This is absolutely insane. Yes, Cole agreed, a smile tugging at his mouth. When would this marriage take place? As soon as you are willing. Tomorrow, if you want, next month if you need time. But I would suggest sooner rather than later, because once the town knows you are my intended, they will make things even more difficult for you. He was right about that. The gossips would have a field day. I need to speak with my aunt, Marianne said, and I need to think. Can you give me until Monday? Take all the time you need, Cole said. I will be in town Monday afternoon. Shall I meet you here at the same time? Yes, 2 o'clock? They walked back toward the mercantile in companionable silence. When they reached the front steps, Cole turned to her and said quietly, Whatever you decide, Miss Fletcher, I meant what I said. You should not have to make yourself smaller to fit other people's expectations. You deserve better than that. Then he touched his hat brim and walked away, leaving Marianne standing in the fading sunlight with her mind whirling like a dust devil on the prairie. Aunt Dorothy listened to the entire story without interruption, her weathered hands wrapped around her teacup, her sharp eyes never leaving Marianne's face. When Marianne finished, Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Do you trust him? She finally asked. I barely know him, Marianne said. But yes, oddly enough I do. There is something genuine about him. He does not have the polished manners of a town gentleman, but he has a kind of integrity that I find more appealing than Polish. Your father once told me that he knew he would marry your mother within an hour of meeting her, Dorothy said slowly. I told him he was crazy, but he was right. They had 20 good years together before the cholera took her. Sometimes you know, Marianne, sometimes your soul recognizes its match before your mind catches up. Are you saying I should marry a stranger and move to a ranch? I am saying you should do what your heart tells you, Dorothy said, but I will also say this. You are dying here, slowly but surely. Every day I watch you try to be yourself and get punished for it. Every day I see a little more light go out in your eyes. Your father would have hated seeing you dimmed like this. He raised you to shine. Tears pricked at Marianne's eyes. What will you do if I leave? You cannot manage this house alone. Do not make me your excuse for staying miserable, Dorothy said sharply. I am old, but not helpless. Besides, Mrs. Chen from the laundry has been looking for a boarder since her husband passed. She and I get along well. We would do fine together. You have this all planned out already? Dorothy smiled. I have been hoping you would find a way out of this town before it crushed your spirit entirely. This cowboy might be that way, or he might not. But you will never know unless you take the risk. Marianne spent Sunday at church enduring the cold shoulders and whispered comments from the other parishioners. Mrs. Pemberton actually turned her back when Marianne tried to greet her. It was petty and cruel, and it made Marianne's decision much easier. On Monday afternoon, she arrived at the park bench at 1:45, carrying a small valise containing her most precious possessions. Her mother's jewelry, her father's favorite books, and the deed to the mercantile shares. She wore her best traveling dress in deep green wool, practical for riding but still flattering. Cole arrived at precisely 2 o'clock, leading 2 horses. When he saw the valise, his face lit up with hope and something deeper. You are saying yes? I am saying yes, Marianne confirmed, on the conditions we discussed: partnership, equality, respect, and patience. You have my word on all of it, Cole said solemnly. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small box. This was my mother's. I know it is not much, but I would like you to have it if you are willing. Inside was a simple gold band with a small garnet stone. It was modest but beautiful, clearly well-loved and carefully kept. It is perfect, Marianne said, meaning it. There is a circuit preacher coming through tomorrow, Cole said. He stays at the boarding house near the stockyards. I already spoke with him this morning. He said he would marry us tomorrow afternoon if we wanted, or we could wait and do something larger if you prefer. Tomorrow afternoon is fine, Marianne said. I do not need fanfare. I just need it to be legal and binding." Cole's smile was brilliant. "Then tomorrow you will become Mrs. Bennet, and we will head to the Triple Bar. I have already spoken to Mr. Patterson. He is pleased to have you join us and eager for your help with the books." "You were very confident I would say yes." "No," Cole said honestly. "I was very hopeful. There is a difference." The wedding took place the next day in the boarding house parlor with Aunt Dorothy, Mr. Patterson, and two of Cole's fellow ranch hands as witnesses. The preacher was a weathered man named Reverend Howard, who asked no questions about the speed of the courtship and seemed genuinely pleased to be marrying two people who looked at each other with such open regard. Marianne wore her green traveling dress and carried a small bouquet of late-season wildflowers that Cole had picked that morning. He wore his best clothes, which were still clearly working clothes, but he stood tall and spoke his vows in a firm, clear voice that left no doubt about his sincerity. When Reverend Howard pronounced them man and wife, Cole kissed Marianne gently, a mere brush of lips that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through her entire body. She was married to a man she had known for 4 days. It should have been terrifying, but instead it felt like stepping through a door into sunlight after years in shadow. The ride to the Triple Bar took 3 hours, following wagon trails through rolling grassland that stretched endlessly under the vast Wyoming sky. Marianne rode beside Cole, both of them leading a pack horse laden with her few possessions. He pointed out landmarks as they traveled, telling her about the ranch and the people she would meet. "There are 10 men working the ranch full-time," he explained. 6 cowboys handling the cattle, 2 working the horse breeding operation, 1 cook, and 1 handyman who manages repairs and such. Most are decent fellows. A few are rough around the edges, but harmless. Mr. Patterson's foreman is a man named Tom Ridley. Been with the ranch 20 years. He runs a tight ship, but fair. And Mr. Patterson himself? Good man. 60 years old, been ranching his whole life. He built the Triple Bar from nothing. His wife Eleanor was the heart of the place. When she died, something went out of him. He still runs the ranch well, but the joy is gone. He keeps to himself mostly. I think having you there to help with the business side might give him a new purpose." As they rode, Cole pointed out a herd of pronghorn antelope in the distance, their white rumps flashing as they bounded away. He showed her where the creek ran widest and best for watering horses, where the good fishing spots were, where eagles nested in the spring. He talked about the land with the affection of someone who truly loved it, and Marianne found herself catching some of his enthusiasm. The Triple Bar ranch house came into view as the sun was lowering toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was a sprawling structure of wood and stone, clearly built in stages as the ranch prospered. Outbuildings spread around it, a barn, bunkhouse, corrals, storage sheds, all well maintained and orderly. Mr. Patterson came out to greet them, a tall, lean man with silver hair and eyes that held both kindness and sorrow. He shook Marianne's hand with genuine warmth. "Welcome to the Triple Bar, Mrs. Bennet. Cole tells me you have a head for figures and organization. God knows I need both. My wife used to manage all the paperwork, and since her passing I have been making a mess of it." "I will be happy to help however I can," Marianne said. "Cole has fixed up the foreman's old cabin for you both," Patterson continued. "Tom moved into the bunkhouse last year, said he preferred the company. It is small but private. I think you will find it comfortable." The cabin was indeed small, but it was clean and well built, with a stone fireplace, 2 rooms, and real glass windows. Cole had clearly worked hard to make it welcoming. There were curtains on the windows, a colorful rag rug on the floor, and a vase of wildflowers on the table. "I know it is not fancy," Cole said, watching her nervously, "but it is solid. Warm in winter, cool in summer, private, ours." "It is wonderful," Marianne said honestly. "I have lived in townhouses my whole life. This feels like an adventure." They spent that first evening arranging Marianne's belongings and making dinner together over the fireplace. Cole was surprisingly competent in the kitchen, explaining that cowboys learned to cook or starved on the trail. They ate beans and cornbread and drank coffee that was strong enough to strip paint, and Marianne found herself relaxing in a way she had not relaxed in months. When bedtime came, there was an awkward moment where both of them clearly were unsure of the expectations. Cole finally said, "I can sleep on the floor if you prefer, or we can share the bed with you knowing I will not push for anything you are not ready for." Marianne considered. "We are married. Sharing a bed seems reasonable, but I appreciate your consideration of my feelings." They undressed separately. Marianne behind a blanket hung for privacy, and both wore night clothes that covered them thoroughly. When they lay down together in the narrow bed, there was careful space between them. But in the deep darkness of night, Marianne found that space less necessary than she had thought. Cole's presence was comforting rather than threatening, and when she woke once from a dream, his hand was resting lightly on her shoulder, warm and protective. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Marianne spent her mornings working with Mr. Patterson on the ranch accounts, which were indeed in terrible disarray. She organized receipts, updated ledgers, wrote letters to buyers and suppliers, and slowly brought order to chaos. Patterson was pathetically grateful and increasingly relaxed in her presence, sometimes even smiling when she pointed out an error or suggested a better system. Her afternoons were spent learning the rhythms of ranch life. She learned to recognize the different cowboys, learned their names and personalities. She learned which horses were gentle and which were temperamental. She learned to read weather signs in the clouds and animal behavior. Cole taught her to ride properly with patience and encouragement until she could handle even the spirited mare named Juniper with confidence. In the evenings, she and Cole would share dinner and conversation, and gradually the space between them in bed grew smaller. He told her stories of his travels, of cattle drives to Kansas and fights with rustlers, of blizzards survived and rivers forded. She told him about her father's mercantile, about the books she loved, about her dreams of a world where women could own property and vote and be full participants in society. "You should write about these things, Cole said one night as they lay together, her head resting on his shoulder. "Write articles. Send them to newspapers. Denver papers might publish them. San Francisco papers. There are publications that support suffrage." "Do you really think so?" "I know so. You articulate these ideas better than most. Your words have power, Marianne. You should use them." It was the first time he had used her given name without asking, and she found she liked the intimacy of it. "Cole," she said tentatively, testing his name on her tongue. "Yes?" "Thank you for seeing me, for valuing me, for giving me this chance." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, tender and sweet. "Thank you for taking a risk on a cowboy you barely knew. That took more courage than I think you realize." Their first real kiss happened 3 weeks into the marriage, on a cool October evening when they had ridden out to check on a section of fence line. The sunset was spectacular, the sky on fire with color, and they had stopped to watch it in awed silence. When Marianne turned to say something about the beauty of it, Cole was looking at her instead of the sky, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "I am falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I thought you should know." Marianne reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his jaw beneath her palm. "I am falling in love with you too. I did not expect it to happen so quickly, but it is happening nonetheless." He kissed her then, properly, deeply, and Marianne felt something in her chest unlock and unfurl like a flower opening to the sun. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and Cole's hands were tangled in her hair. "We should get back," he said roughly, "before I forget myself entirely." But that night, in their small cabin, they did not maintain space between them. They came together with a passion that surprised them both, a joining that was both physical and emotional, binding them in ways that legal vows had not quite managed. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Marianne felt a completeness she had not known she was missing. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Cole whispered back, "and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me." The trouble started in late October when Marianne accompanied Mr. Patterson into town for supply purchases. She had been managing the ranch accounts for 6 weeks, and Patterson wanted her input on bulk buying decisions for winter supplies. They went to the feed store, the general store, and finally to the bank to arrange a loan extension on some breeding stock purchases. At the bank, they encountered Mr. Thornton, one of the town's leading citizens and a vocal opponent of women's suffrage. He looked at Marianne with undisguised contempt. "So the radical spinster found herself a cowboy willing to take her on," he said loudly enough for everyone in the bank to hear. "I suppose desperate men will marry anything if the price is right." Marianne felt anger flash hot in her chest, but before she could respond, Mr. Patterson stepped forward. "I will thank you to speak respectfully of Mrs. Bennet," he said coldly. "She is the finest bookkeeper I have ever employed, and her organizational skills have saved my ranch thousands of dollars already. Furthermore, she is a lady of education and principle, which is more than I can say for men who insult women in public spaces." Thornton's face reddened. "Now see here, Patterson." "No, you see here," Patterson continued. "Mrs. Bennet is associated with the triple bar, which means she is under my protection. Any insult to her is an insult to me and my operation. I do considerable business in this town, Thornton. I would hate to have to take that business elsewhere because I could not trust the local establishment to treat my people with basic decency." The bank manager, a nervous man named Phillips, immediately interjected. "There is no need for threats, gentlemen. Mr. Thornton, perhaps you could conduct your business in my office while I assist Mr. Patterson and Mrs. Bennet out here." Thornton glared but retreated, and the rest of the banking business was conducted smoothly. As they left, Patterson said quietly, "I meant every word of that. You are valuable to the ranch and to me personally. You remind me of Eleanor in your spirit and capability. Do not let small men make you feel small, Mrs. Bennet." "Thank you, Mr. Patterson," Marianne said, touched. "That means more than you know." When she told Cole about the incident that evening, his jaw tightened with anger. "I should ride into town and have a conversation with Thornton." "No," Marianne said firmly. "That would only make things worse. Mr. Patterson handled it perfectly. Besides, I do not need you to fight my battles for me." "I know you do not need me to," Cole said, "but I want to. When someone hurts you, I hurt too. That is what happens when you love someone." Marianne kissed him softly. "I know, but the best revenge is living well and succeeding despite their disapproval. That is what I intend to do." And she did. Throughout that winter, Marianne transformed the Triple Bar's business operations. She negotiated better prices with suppliers, established new markets for their beef, implemented inventory systems that prevented waste, and managed correspondence with an efficiency that impressed everyone who worked with her. The ranch's profits increased by 30% in the first 6 months of her management. More importantly, she began to write. She penned articles about ranch management, about cattle breeding, about the economics of Western agriculture. She wrote under her own name and sent them to newspapers in Denver, Omaha, and San Francisco. To her astonished delight, 3 of them were published. The editors requested more. Then, emboldened, she began writing about women's issues. She wrote about property rights and voting rights and educational opportunities. She wrote about the absurdity of denying half the population a voice in governance. She wrote with passion and precision, and to her shock, these articles were published too, not in Wyoming papers, but in progressive publications in Chicago and New York. Her words reached thousands of readers. Cole was fiercely proud of her. He read every article multiple times, showed them to anyone who would look, and framed the first one to be published. "My wife, the famous writer," he would say with a grin that made her heart swell. Their first winter together was harsh, as Wyoming winters always were. Snow piled high around the cabin, and temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in minutes. But inside their small home, with the fireplace roaring and their love warming them, Marianne had never been happier. They read books together, played cards, talked for hours about everything and nothing. Cole taught her to play the harmonica badly. She taught him some French she had learned from a tutor years ago. And physically, Their marriage deepened into something that left Marianne breathless with its intensity. Cole was a generous and attentive lover, and she discovered depths of passion in herself that she had not known existed. They were partners in every sense of the word, and the bond between them strengthened with each passing day. In March of 1877, as the snow began to melt and early grass appeared on the southern slopes, Marianne realized she was pregnant. She told Cole on a bright morning while they were watching the first calves of the season being born in the near pasture. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply. Cole turned to stare at her, his eyes wide. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I have missed my monthly courses twice, and I'm sick every morning. It seems fairly conclusive." He let out a whoop of joy that startled the nearby cattle and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby, a real baby, our baby." "That is generally how these things work, yes," Marianne said, grinning at his unabashed excitement. "Are you happy?" he asked, suddenly serious. "I know we did not exactly plan this." "I am terrified and thrilled in equal measure," Marianne admitted. "But yes, I am happy. I think you will be a wonderful father." "I want to do better than my father did," Cole said. "He loved us, but he was not around much, always working. I want to be present. I want our children to know they are loved and valued, not just fed and clothed." Their children. Plural. Marianne had not thought that far ahead, but the idea filled her with warmth. The pregnancy progressed well despite the hard work Marianne continued to do. She refused to be treated as an invalid, though she did accept help with the heavier tasks. Cole was attentive to the point of being comically overprotective, hovering whenever she climbed stairs or lifted anything heavier than a teacup. Mr. Patterson gave her a rocking chair for the cabin, hand-carved by his own hands, and told her gruffly that every mother needed a proper place to rock her babies. "In July, Mr." Patterson made an announcement at dinner, which they still took communally in the ranch house several times a week. "I have decided to restructure the business. Mrs. Bennett has done more for this ranch in 9 months than I managed in the 3 years since Eleanor passed. I am making her a full partner in the operation. 10% ownership of the Triple Bar, legally documented and binding." The stunned silence was broken by Tom Ridley starting to clap, and soon everyone joined in. Marianne felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at the weathered rancher who had given her not just acceptance, but true recognition. "Thank you," she managed to say. "I do not know what to say except thank you." "Say you will keep making us profitable," Patterson said with a rare smile. "That is all the thanks I need." Their son was born in November during the first major snowstorm of the season. The labor was long and difficult, with only the ranch cook's wife, a capable woman named Mary, who had birthed 6 children of her own, to assist. Cole paced outside the cabin like a caged wolf, and when Mary finally emerged to tell him he had a healthy son and his wife was exhausted, but well, he nearly knocked her over rushing inside. Marianne lay in their bed, pale and tired but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Cole approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the red-faced infant who was making small mewling sounds. "He is so small." "He will grow," Marianne said. "What shall we name him?" "Samuel," Cole said immediately. "After your father, if that would please you." Fresh tears spilled down Marianne's cheeks. "It would please me very much. Samuel Fletcher Bennett." "Samuel Fletcher Bennett," Cole repeated, reaching down to touch one tiny fist. The baby's fingers curled around his calloused finger, and Cole's face transformed with wonder and love so profound it took Marianne's breath away. "I promise you, Samuel, I will be the father you deserve. I will teach you to be strong and gentle, brave and kind, and I will make sure you grow up respecting women, starting with your remarkable mother." The winter passed in a blur of sleepless nights and tender moments. Samuel proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who demanded attention at all hours. Marianne continued her writing when she could, with Samuel sleeping in a basket beside her desk. She wrote about motherhood and partnership, about building a life on the frontier, about the ways women contributed to the Western expansion that were rarely acknowledged in official histories. Her articles attracted a small but dedicated following. She received letters from women across the country who saw themselves in her words, who were inspired by her example. Some letters were from men who found her ideas threatening, who told her in varying degrees of politeness that she should shut up and tend to her home. These Cole used to start fires in the stove, which gave them both satisfaction. In spring of 1878, when Samuel was 6 months old and thriving, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from a publisher in New York who had been reading her articles and wanted to know if she would be interested in writing a book about women's lives in the West, based on her experiences and observations. A book, Marianne breathed, reading the letter for the third time. They want me to write an actual book. Of course they do, Cole said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Your writing is powerful. People need to hear what you have to say. But how would I even manage it with Samuel and the ranch work? We would figure it out, Cole said firmly. This is your dream, Marianne. We will make it work. And they did. Over the next year, Marianne wrote in the early mornings before Samuel woke and in the late evenings after he slept. She interviewed the few other women on neighboring ranches, gathering their stories. She wrote about the reality of frontier life for women, the backbreaking labor, the loneliness, the danger, but also the freedom, the opportunity, the ways women shaped the West through their resilience and ingenuity. Cole supported her completely, taking on extra childcare duties, bringing her coffee when she was burning the midnight oil, reading drafts, and offering thoughtful feedback. Mr. Patterson gave her access to ranch records for statistical information and historical context. Even the Cowboys contributed stories about their mothers and sisters and wives, adding depth and texture to her narrative. The manuscript was completed in October 1879 and sent east. The waiting was agonizing, but in February 1880, a telegram arrived confirming that the book would be published in August. They were offering an advance payment of $300, a fortune to Marianne, who had never had that much money at once in her life. We should invest it, Cole suggested. Buy more land for the ranch or cattle. Build your stake in the operation. Half of it, Marianne agreed. The other half goes into a fund for Samuel's education. I want him to go to university if he wants to. I want him to have every opportunity. Agreed, Cole said, though I hope we will have more children to educate as well. Marianne, who was nursing Samuel at the time, smiled at her husband. I think that can be arranged. Their daughter was born in April 1881, a robust baby with Cole's dark hair and Marianne's green eyes. They named her Dorothy Eleanor Bennett after both their lost mothers. Aunt Dorothy traveled to the ranch for the birth and stayed a month, delighting in her namesake and fussing over Samuel, who was now an energetic toddler with his father's fearless spirit and his mother's stubborn determination. You have made a good life here, Aunt Dorothy told Marianne on the day before she returned to town. You are happy in a way you never were in Cheyenne. That cowboy of yours is a treasure. Hold on to him. I intend to, Marianne assured her. The book was published as promised in August 1881, titled Western Women Lives of Labor and Liberty. It sold modestly at first, but word of mouth spread. Women's groups began purchasing copies in bulk. Newspapers reviewed it, some praising its honesty, others condemning its radical ideas. But it was being read, and that was what mattered to Marianne. More importantly, it was read in Wyoming Territory. Copies made their way to Cheyenne, and Marianne knew the women who had shunned her were reading about themselves, thinly disguised in her pages. She had been fair but honest in her portrayals, showing the constraints women faced and the courage it took to step outside those constraints. In September, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Triple Bar. Mrs. Pemberton, the woman who had been most vocal in her criticism of Marianne, rode up to the ranch in a hired buggy, looking uncomfortable and determined in equal measure. Marianne was on the porch with Dorothy Eleanor when the buggy arrived. She handed the baby to Mary and walked down to meet her former antagonist. "Mrs. Pemberton, this is unexpected." The older woman climbed down from the buggy with some difficulty, her fine town clothes looking out of place against the ranch backdrop. "Mrs. Bennet, may I speak with you privately?" Intrigued despite herself, Marianne led her to the bench near the garden that she had planted that spring. They sat, and Mrs. Pemberton was silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with whatever she had come to say. "I read your book," she finally said, "every word of it. And I saw myself in those pages, in the women you described who enforced conformity because they were afraid of what would happen if they stepped out of line themselves." Marianne said nothing, waiting. "I was wrong to treat you the way I did," Mrs. Pemberton continued, the words clearly costing her. "I was frightened by your boldness because it made me confront my own cowardice. I've spent my entire life doing what I was told, believing what I was supposed to believe, never questioning whether there might be another way. You questioned everything, and it terrified me because if you could do that, what excuse did I have?" "Mrs. Pemberton," Marianne said gently, it takes courage to come here and say this." "Not as much courage as it took for you to stand up in that meeting and speak your truth knowing everyone would condemn you for it," Mrs. Pemberton said. "I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And I wanted you to know that your book has started conversations among the women in Cheyenne. Some are angry, but some are thinking. Some are questioning. You planted seeds, Mrs. Bennet, and they are beginning to grow." After Mrs. Pemberton left, Marianne sat on the bench for a long time processing the conversation. Cole found her there as the sun was setting, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "You are changing things," he said quietly. "Maybe not as fast as you would like, but you are making a difference. People are listening." "Some people," Marianne said. "There will always be those who refuse to hear. But you do not need everyone to hear. You just need enough people. Change happens slowly, then all at once. You are part of that change." The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy who loved books almost as much as he loved horses. Dorothy Eleanor was fearless and joyful, following her older brother everywhere and refusing to be left behind on any adventure. In 1883, Marianne gave birth to twin boys James and Thomas, who were identical in appearance but opposite in temperament. James was quiet and thoughtful, while Thomas was loud and impulsive. Marianne's second book, published in 1884, focused specifically on women's suffrage and property rights, using Wyoming's unique position as the first territory to grant women the vote in 1869 as a case study for why such rights benefited entire communities, not just women. It was more controversial than her first book, banned in several cities, but it also sold better and reached a wider audience. Cole continued working the ranch, eventually becoming Patterson's official foreman when Tom Ridley retired in 1885. He was fair and competent, respected by the men he supervised, but he was also known as the Cowboy whose wife was a famous author, and he wore that reputation with pride rather than shame. When men tried to tease him about it, he simply said, "I like a woman who knows her worth," and that usually ended the conversation. In 1886, Wyoming Territory was moving towards statehood, and there were heated debates about whether the state constitution would maintain women's suffrage. Marianne was invited to speak at the Constitutional Convention, a rare honor for a woman. She debated with herself for weeks about whether to accept, knowing it would bring renewed scrutiny and criticism. "You have to go," Cole told her. "This is what you have been working toward all these years. This is your chance to actually shape the future." "But the children need me. The ranch needs me." "The children will be fine with me and Mary for a few days. The ranch will survive. Your voice is needed in that convention hall, Marianne, not just for Wyoming women, but for women everywhere who are watching to see what we do." So she went, traveling to Cheyenne in September 1886 with Cole by her side and her carefully prepared speech in her traveling bag. She was one of only 3 women invited to address the convention, and the hall was packed when she stood to speak. She looked out at the assembled delegates, at the men who would decide the future of Wyoming's government, and she felt not fear but determination. She had spent 10 years building her credibility, her reputation, her voice. This was her moment. "Gentlemen," she began, and her voice carried clearly through the hall, "I stand before you not as a radical or an agitator, but as a citizen of Wyoming Territory who has contributed substantially to its economic and social development. I run a successful ranch operation. I employ men who depend on my management skills for their livelihoods. I pay taxes on my property and business interests. I am educated and informed about political issues. Yet there are men in this hall who would deny me the right to vote on those issues simply because of my sex." She spoke for 20 minutes, laying out logical arguments, economic reasoning, moral imperatives. She cited statistics and examples. She appealed to their sense of fairness and their pride in Wyoming's progressive legacy. And when she finished, the hall erupted in applause from roughly half the delegates, while the other half sat in stony silence. The debate raged for 3 more days, but in the end, women's suffrage was included in the Wyoming Constitution. When Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, it would be the first state where women could vote in all elections, not just local ones. Marianne's speech had been one of many factors in that decision, but it had mattered. She had mattered. Returning to the Triple Bar after the convention felt like coming home in a way that Cheyenne never had. The ranch had become her true place, and the people there her true community. The cowboys greeted her with grins and congratulations. Mr. Patterson hugged her, something he never did, and told her that Eleanor would have been proud, and Cole, her Cole, who had believed in her from that first strange evening when he followed her from a town meeting, took her hand and said, "You changed history today. You know that, do you not?" "We changed it together," Marianne corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you believing in me, supporting me, giving me the foundation to build from." "We make a good team," Cole agreed, pulling her close. In 1889, as Wyoming prepared for statehood, Mr. Patterson announced his retirement. He was 73 years old and tired, but instead of selling the Triple Bar to outside interests, he offered to sell his remaining shares to Marianne and Cole at a generous price, making them majority owners. "This place was Eleanor's dream as much as mine," he told them. "She would want it to go to people who love it and will care for it properly. That is you two. You have earned this." By 1890, when Wyoming officially became the 44th state of the Union, the Triple Bar was entirely owned by the Bennetts. It had grown to over 5,000 acres, ran 2,000 head of cattle, and was known throughout the region as one of the best managed operations in Wyoming. Marianne's books were taught in some Eastern universities as examples of frontier literature. She was occasionally invited to speak at women's colleges and suffrage rallies, though she rarely accepted because she preferred to stay close to home and family. Samuel, now 12, was already helping seriously with ranch work and talking about agricultural college. Dorothy Eleanor, 9 years old, was learning both her mother's bookkeeping skills and her father's way with horses. The twins, 7, were a matched set of mischief and energy who kept everyone on their toes. On July 4th, 1890, the Bennetts held a celebration at the ranch to mark statehood and women's participation in their first state elections. Friends from neighboring ranches came, along with some of the more progressive families from Cheyenne. Even Mrs. Pemberton attended, now a vocal supporter of women's suffrage who publicly credited Marianne with opening her eyes to inequality. As the sun set and children ran through the grass playing tag, Cole found Marianne sitting on the porch of the ranch house, watching the festivities with a contented smile. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling beside her. "I am thinking about how different my life could have been," Marianne said, "if you had not followed me that night in Cheyenne, if you had not seen something worthwhile in the woman everyone else wanted to silence." Cole took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles in the familiar gesture she loved. "I am the one who benefited from that meeting. You gave me a life richer than I ever imagined, a true partnership, children I adore, a home that means something. You made me better than I was." "We made each other better," Marianne said. That is what love does when it is real and equal. It lifts both people higher. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, watching their friends and neighbors celebrate, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to deep blue. Samuel ran up to ask if he could stay up late with the older boys, and Dorothy Eleanor wanted to know if she could ride one of the new horses tomorrow morning, and the twins reported breathlessly that they had caught 3 frogs down by the creek, and did she want to see them? "Later, darlings," Marianne said, laughing. "Let your father and me enjoy the sunset for a few more minutes." When the children had scattered again, Cole said quietly, "Do you have any regrets? About leaving town? About marrying a cowboy you barely knew? About the life you have had to build out here?" Marianne turned to look at him fully, at this man who had given her everything by asking for nothing except that she remain herself. His face showed the years they had spent together, lines from sun and wind and laughter, touches of silver in his dark hair. But his eyes were the same as they had been that first night, clear and honest and full of regard for her. "Not a single one," she said. "You told me once that you liked a woman who knew her worth, but the truth is, Cole Bennett, you taught me to truly know my worth. You showed me what it felt like to be valued, not despite my outspokenness, but because of it. You gave me space to grow and support, to stand tall, and love to sustain me through everything. How could I possibly regret that?" He kissed her then, a kiss that still had the power to make her heart race after all these years, and when they pulled apart, he was smiling. "I love you, Marianne Bennett. Every opinionated, brilliant, stubborn, magnificent part of you." "I love you too," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away." In 1892, Marianne published her 3rd book, this one a collection of essays about marriage, partnership, and raising children to think for themselves. She dedicated it to Cole with the inscription, "To my husband, who proved that the strongest men are those who are not threatened by strong women." The book was her most successful yet, going through 3 printings in its first year. The royalties allowed them to expand the ranch further, build a proper schoolhouse for their children and the children of ranch workers, and establish a lending library that served the entire county. In 1896, when Samuel was 17 and preparing to attend the newly established University of Wyoming in Laramie, a journalist from Harper's Weekly traveled to the Triple Bar to interview Marianne for a feature article on influential Western women. The young man, fresh from New York and full of Eastern assumptions about frontier life, seemed surprised to find a prosperous ranch run by an articulate woman in partnership with her cowboy husband. "Mrs. Bennett," he asked, his pencil poised over his notebook, "do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Cheyenne society? If you had conformed to expectations?" Marianne looked around at her ranch, at the home she had built with Cole, at their children laughing together near the corrals, at the life they had created through mutual respect and love. "I do not wonder about that at all," she said. "I would have been miserable and diminished. Instead, I am here, doing work I love, with a man I adore, raising children who know they can be whoever they choose to be. I would not trade this for anything." The journalist wrote furiously, "And you, Mr. Bennett? Any regrets about marrying such an outspoken woman? Many men would find it challenging." Cole, who had been standing in the doorway listening, walked over and put his hand on Marianne's shoulder. "Only a weak man is threatened by a strong woman. I am not weak, and my wife's strength makes our life better in every way. She manages this ranch with skill that surpasses most men I know. She has given me 4 incredible children. She has challenged me to be smarter, kinder, more thoughtful. Why in God's name would I regret that?" The article, when it was published in November 1896, painted a picture of the Bennetts that was both romantic and revolutionary. It showed a marriage of true equals, a partnership where both parties contributed their full selves. Letters poured in afterward, mostly from women thanking Marianne for showing that such marriages were possible, but also from some men who said the article had made them rethink their own relationships. "You are becoming quite famous," Cole teased one evening as they read through the latest batch of correspondence. "We are becoming quite famous," Marianne corrected. "You are featured as prominently as I am, the cowboy who values his wife's mind as much as her other attributes." "I value all your attributes," Cole said with a grin that made her blush despite nearly 20 years of marriage. "But your mind is definitely in the top tier." Their life continued to evolve and deepen. Samuel did attend the University of Wyoming, studying agricultural science and returning to the ranch each summer to apply his learning. He brought home a young woman named Catherine in 1899, a fellow student who shared his passion for modern farming techniques. They married in 1900, and Catherine proved to be cut from the same cloth as Marianne, educated and opinionated and entirely comfortable with her own worth. Dorothy Eleanor, spirited and independent, announced at 16 that she wanted to attend veterinary college, a field almost entirely closed to women. Cole and Marianne moved heaven and earth to make it happen, eventually finding a program in Colorado that would accept female students. She graduated in 1899 and returned to Wyoming to become one of the first female veterinarians in the state, treating livestock across 3 counties from a base at the Triple Bar. The twins took different paths. James became a teacher, opening a school in a nearby settlement where he taught both boys and girls, white children and children of the immigrant families who were increasingly moving to Wyoming. Thomas, more restless, spent several years working different ranches before finally settling in Montana with a ranch of his own and a wife he had met at a cattle auction. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Marianne and Cole stood together looking at the ranch they had built. They were 47 and 53 respectively, graying and weathered, but still healthy and active. Their children were grown, or nearly so, launched into lives of purpose and meaning. The Triple Bar was prosperous and well regarded. Marianne's books were being taught in schools. They had achieved more than either had dreamed possible that night in Cheyenne 24 years earlier. "Do you ever miss the excitement of those early years, Sinai?" Cole asked. "The struggle? The proving ourselves?" Marianne leaned into him and his arm came around her automatically, a gesture so familiar it was unconscious. "Not even a little bit. I have excitement enough in watching our children build their own lives and in seeing the changes we helped create taking root. Besides, I have you. That is more than enough excitement for any lifetime." In 1903, Wyoming celebrated its 13th year of statehood with a special commemoration of women's suffrage. Marianne was invited to speak at the celebration in Cheyenne, and this time, when she stood before a crowd, it was not hostile or scandalized. People listened respectfully. Women thanked her afterward for her advocacy. Men acknowledged her contributions to the state's development. Mrs. Pemberton, now a dedicated suffragist herself, introduced Marianne by saying, "This woman was shunned by our community for speaking truths we were not ready to hear. But she spoke them anyway with courage and conviction. She showed us that women could be full partners in building the West, not just decorative additions. We owe her an apology and our gratitude." The applause was thunderous, and when Marianne looked out into the crowd, she saw Cole standing in the back, clapping harder than anyone else, his face glowing with pride and love. That night, in the hotel room they had taken in town, Cole made love to her with the same passion and tenderness he had shown from the beginning. Afterward, lying in his arms, Marianne said, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For giving me the space to become fully myself. For never asking me to be less than I was. For standing beside me instead of in front of me or behind me." Cole kissed her temple. "That is not something that requires thanks. That is just love, real love, the kind that sees the other person completely and cherishes everything it sees." In 1905, when Marianne was 52 and Cole was 58, they became grandparents for the first time. Samuel and Catherine welcomed a daughter they named Marianne Eleanor, and when Marianne held her tiny namesake for the first time, she wept with joy. "She is going to grow up in a world where she can vote," she told Cole through her tears. where she can own property, where she can be educated and speak her mind without being shunned. We helped make that world for her. You helped make that world, Cole said. I just had the good sense to recognize brilliance when I saw it and the wisdom to nurture it instead of trying to contain it. More grandchildren followed over the next years. Dorothy Eleanor, who had chosen her career over marriage for many years, finally married a fellow veterinarian in 1907 and gave them twin granddaughters in 1908. James and his wife had 3 children in quick succession. Thomas sent word from Montana that he was a father to a son. The Triple Bar continued to prosper under their management. They modernized carefully, bringing in new breeding stock, implementing rotational grazing, building better facilities. But they also maintained the values that had made the ranch successful, treating workers fairly, managing the land sustainably, contributing to the community. In 1910, Cole began having some trouble with his heart. The doctor in Cheyenne said it was not immediately dangerous, but that he should avoid overexertion. Cole was deeply frustrated by the limitations, but Marianne was firm. "You have worked yourself to the bone for 34 years, she told him. "Samuel is perfectly capable of managing the daily operations now. You have earned the right to slow down and enjoy what we have built." So Cole stepped back from the heaviest ranch work, though he still rode out most days to check on things and offer advice. He spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope and read the weather. He helped Marianne with her writing, serving as her first editor and most enthusiastic supporter. And in the quiet evenings, they would sit together on the porch of their cabin, which they had expanded and improved over the years but never abandoned, and they would talk about the life they had lived together. "I have been thinking," Cole said one evening in the summer of 1912, "about that night when I followed you from the town meeting, about how close I came to not speaking to you at all. I was nervous, afraid you would think I was insane or inappropriate." "What made you do it?" Marianne asked. They had been married 36 years, and she had never asked this question directly. "Honestly, I was lonely. I had been lonely for years, working ranches, having casual friendships, but nothing deep, nothing real. And when I watched you walk out of that hall with your dignity intact despite everyone condemning you, I thought that if I could build a life with someone like that, I would never be lonely again. So I took the risk." "And were you right? Are you lonely?" Cole turned to look at her, his weathered face soft with love. "Not for a single day since I married you. Even when we fight, even when we disagree, even in the hard times, I have never felt alone. You are my partner in the truest sense, my other half. My better half, really." "Not better," Marianne said. "Equal. That is what makes it work." In 1915, as the world was descending into war in Europe, Marianne published her final book. It was a memoir of her life with Cole, of building the Triple Bar, of raising children who thought for themselves, of the slow but steady progress of women's rights in the West. She titled it simply, "A Partnership of Equals, One Woman's Journey to Love and Liberty." The dedication read, "To Cole Bennett, the cowboy who saw worth in a woman the world wanted to silence. You saved my life by giving me space to live it fully. Everything good in these pages exists because you existed first." When Cole read the dedication, he cried, something Marianne had seen him do only a handful of times in their decades together. "You saved my life too," he told her. "I was just existing before you. You taught me how to truly live." The book was her most successful, going through 6 printings and being translated into German and French. But more importantly to Marianne, it reached women who were trapped as she had been trapped. And it showed them that escape was possible, that partnership was possible, that love and respect could exist in marriage if you found the right person. Letters came from all over the world. From a woman in Boston who had left an abusive marriage after reading about Marianne's insistence on respect and equality, from a young girl in London who decided to attend university despite her family's objections, from a rancher's wife in Australia who started her own business after being inspired by Marianne's example. The ripples spread outward in ways Marianne could never have predicted. In 1918, as the Great War ended and the world tried to rebuild, Cole's heart finally gave him serious trouble. He survived, but the doctor was clear that his time was limited. He needed to avoid stress and exertion, needed to rest more and work less. "I am not ready to lose you," Marianne told him fiercely as he recovered in their bed. "We have more life to live together yet." "I am not going anywhere if I can help it," Cole promised. "I still need to see more grandchildren grow up. I still need to watch you continue changing the world. I still need to wake up next to you every morning for as long as possible." He lived another 6 years. Years they spent savoring rather than rushing. They traveled some, visiting Thomas in Montana, taking the train to San Francisco to see the Pacific Ocean together. They spent time with their grandchildren, now numerous and varied in their interests and personalities. They read books together in the evenings and still talked for hours about everything from politics to philosophy to whether the new automobile would ever truly replace the horse. On a warm September evening in 1924, almost exactly 48 years after they had met, Cole died peacefully in his sleep with Marianne beside him. He was 80 years old. She was 71. They had spent 48 years building a life together that had exceeded both their expectations. At his funeral, which was attended by hundreds of people from across Wyoming and beyond, Marianne stood and spoke about her husband with a clear voice that did not waver. Cole Bennett was a cowboy who understood something that many people never learn. He understood that true strength lies not in dominating others, but in empowering them. He understood that love means celebrating your partner's full humanity, not just the parts that are convenient or comfortable. He saw me when I was at my most rejected and vulnerable, and instead of seeing a problem to be fixed, he saw a woman of worth. That gift, that recognition gave me the foundation to become everything I was meant to be. I loved him with my whole heart, and I will carry that love with me for whatever years remain to me. Marianne lived another 12 years after Cole's death, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. She continued to write occasionally, though mostly letters now, maintaining correspondence with women across the country and around the world who sought her advice and perspective. She remained active in suffrage work, living to see the 19th Amendment ratified in 1920, giving all American women the right to vote. The Triple Bar continued to thrive under Samuel's management, with Dorothy Eleanor handling the veterinary needs and the twins visiting regularly with their families. It remained a Bennett family operation, just as Cole and Marianne had intended. On quiet evenings, Marianne would sit on the porch of the cabin she had shared with Cole and remember their life together. She would think about that first extraordinary night when a cowboy had followed her from a town meeting because he admired her courage. She would think about his words, spoken with such simple sincerity. "I like a woman who knows her worth." He had given her so much more than she could ever adequately express. He had given her freedom to be herself, partnership in all things, children she adored, a life of purpose and meaning. But most importantly, he had given her love, real love, the kind that empowered rather than constrained, that celebrated rather than criticized, that endured through decades of daily life and emerged stronger rather than weaker. When Marianne passed away peacefully in her sleep in April 1936 at the age of 83, her family found a letter she had written to be read after her death. In it, she described her life with Cole in detail, wanting her descendants to know the truth of their story. She ended with these words, "I was shunned for speaking my mind too freely, condemned for refusing to make myself small and quiet and acceptable. I could have let that silence me. I could have given up my voice to gain approval, but I did not. And because I did not, I found Cole. He told me he liked a woman who knew her worth, and then he spent 48 years proving he meant it. He showed me that love does not require you to diminish yourself. Real love makes room for your full self, your voice, your opinions, your dreams. We built something beautiful together, not despite my outspokenness, but because of it. I want every woman who reads this to know that you do not have to choose between love and self. The right partner will celebrate both. Hold out for that person. Do not settle for less than you deserve. Know your worth and find someone who recognizes it too. The letter was framed and hung in the ranch house, where it remained for generations, a testament to a love story that began with a cowboy brave enough to approach a woman the world had rejected and wise enough to recognize that her rejection by society was evidence of her worth, not proof of her unworthiness. Samuel Bennett, who managed the Triple Bar until 1940 before passing it to his own children, often told his grandchildren the story of how their great-grandparents met. He would describe that night in Cheyenne when his mother stormed out of a town meeting and his father followed her into the darkness because he saw something in her that others had missed. They were both brave, he would say. Your grandmother was brave for refusing to silence herself even when it cost her everything. And your grandfather was brave for loving her completely, for supporting her dreams, for building a life where she could be fully herself. That is the kind of love you should look for. The kind that makes you more, not less. The Triple Bar continued to prosper through the decades, through depressions and wars, through droughts and hard winters, always guided by Bennett family members who had learned from Marianne and Cole that the best partnerships were built on mutual respect and honest communication. The ranch became known not just for its quality cattle and horses, but for being a place where women worked alongside men as equals, where education was valued, where people were judged by their character rather than their conformity to rigid roles. And in the Wyoming State Museum in Cheyenne, there was eventually a permanent exhibit about Marianne Fletcher Bennett, the author and activist who had helped secure women's rights in Wyoming and beyond. The exhibit included first editions of her books, copies of her published articles, photographs of her with Cole and their family, and a reproduction of that final letter she had written to her descendants. Visitors to the museum would read her words and see the photographs of a woman who had refused to be diminished, who had found love with a cowboy wise enough to value her exactly as she was. They would see pictures of Cole, weathered and handsome, always standing beside rather than in front of his wife. They would see the family they had built together, the legacy they had created. And sometimes visitors would leave the museum with a new understanding that love, real love, did not require you to make yourself smaller. Sometimes it required you to find someone brave enough to celebrate your full size, your full voice, your full self. Someone who would say, as Cole Bennett had said to Marianne Fletcher on a September evening in 1876, "I like a woman who knows her worth," and then spend a lifetime proving it was true. The story of Marianne and Cole became part of Wyoming folklore, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. But those who had known them personally insisted it was all true, that their love had been exactly as profound and revolutionary as the stories suggested. They had found each other at exactly the right moment, two people ready for partnership, and they had built something that lasted far beyond their individual lives. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the Triple Bar in the late 20th century, still guided by the principles Marianne and Cole had established over a century before. Respect for all people regardless of sex or background. Value for education and independent thinking. Fair treatment of workers, sustainable management of the land, partnership in all endeavors. And in the cabin that had been their first home together, carefully preserved and maintained, there was a simple plaque that read, "Here lived Marianne and Cole Bennett, who proved that the strongest love is built on equality, respect, and the courage to be fully yourself with another person. May all who enter here remember their example and strive to build partnerships as honest and true." It was a legacy worth leaving, a love story worth remembering, a life worth living.